Welcome to the Have More Fun podcast. In this episode, I talk with Candace Cameron Bure about kissing people on TV, how to maintain friendship even when you're busy, and her best makeup tip.
My very first kiss was on TV. So I've been acting since I was 5 years old, and at 13 years old, I had my first kiss with millions of people watching. The old makeup lesson from Aunt Becky. Less is more, the natural look. That's what boys and people like more on girls, is just to enhance the beauty that you already have and not take on your makeup.
Hannah Brencher was a 20-year-old college student whose favorite part of the day was walking to her mailbox to see if her mom had written her a note. Not one for email or texting. Her mom preferred a more old-fashioned form of communication, handwritten letters on lovely stationery, the kind of offering that in decades past would have been received, read with care multiple times over, and then stacked neatly with other notes and tied together with a ribbon, only to be tucked into a special place to save and reread years later. After college, Hannah moved to New York City and found herself, as she says, sucker punched in the face by depression. And so she did the only thing she could think of at the time. She wrote the same kind of letters she had received from her mom, but Hannah wrote them to strangers, leaving them throughout the city in cafes and in libraries, at the UN, and on the subway. She then blogged about the letters and posed a crazy promise to the internet. If you asked her for a handwritten letter, she would write one to you, no questions asked. And overnight, her inbox filled up with people requesting a letter who needed something to look forward to, a word of hope, a reminder that everything was going to be okay. Hannah Brencher sparked a revolution of letter writing, and the stories she picked up along the way witnessed to the power of kindness, like a woman whose husband had just come home from Afghanistan, still suffering from the isolation of PTSD. The wife couldn't quite break through the trauma of war, and so she started tucking love letters throughout their house for him as a way to say, "Come back to me. I'm here whenever you're ready." Or a girl who decided to leave love letters around her school campus in Iowa, only to find her efforts multiplied the next day when she walked out onto the quad only to find love letters hanging from trees and tucked in bushes. Or a man who was contemplating taking his life and put one last SOS out on Facebook and then received an outpouring of letters from strangers around the globe. He now rereads those letters from kind individuals who went out of their way to mail a handwritten note with a simple message that things will get better. The power of kindness is undeniable, and a force of subversion that can undo fear, distrust, hatred, and division. Which is why I'm so pleased to talk with Candace Cameron Bure about her new book, Kind is the New Classy. I read the book a while ago while on an airplane and found myself cheering in solidarity with the ways that she weaves together work, faith, and motherhood with grace and honesty. Not to mention that I may have binge-watched Fuller House last Christmas with my girls and my mom, so I kind of feel like Candace and I are already friends. So without further ado, here is my new friend, Candace Cameron Bure. Okay, so Candace, I just finished your new book, Kind is the New Classy, and I have to tell you, as someone who has been known to hide in my closet on occasion, the story you share about you and Whoopi Goldberg was so moving. Will you just tell us a brief version of what happened in that moment in your dressing room?
Yeah. That story is as fresh in my mind now as the day it happened. It was a really emotional day because a shooting had happened in LA, and I was basically overcome with emotion being in New York. My children, their schools were shut down and being evacuated, and I had to go on live television, and it was a stressful job to begin with, and knowing I wasn't at home with my children and couldn't just be the mama bear and protect them was difficult, and then had ended up kind of having an argument with my husband, and it just felt like my whole world was collapsing, and I was so emotional and just started crying, and yet I had this tiny, teeny little dressing room, which was kind of in the middle of the hub of where everything, the whole show gets organized, producers, writers, staff members. And so I hid in my closet because it just gave me an extra layer of privacy in an already very little room. And I just sobbed and prayed and cried out to God to just help me kind of calm down and control my emotions for the next few hours. And that's when there was a persistent knock on the door, and I really didn't want to get it, but the knock kept coming. And when I finally did open it, it was Whoopi standing there, and she asked to come in, and she just spread her arms wide open and said, "Give me a hug." And she just hugged me for as long as I wanted until I let go, and just offered me the most just compassionate, like, mama bear hug, and basically told me that she was there for me, and she wasn't gonna let me fail on the show, or she would help me through it. And it was a really incredible moment for me, just knowing that someone had my back, and that Whoopi had my back out there on what was one of the most stressful days of my whole time on The View.
So good. And I love how you talk about kindness and seeing it as an intentional choice, and how subversive it can be even in the smallest gestures, like going into someone's room and giving them a mama bear hug. And it totally reminds me of being a mom, and how being a mom means a whole new level of kindness opens up in our heart, and also a whole new level of analyzing our lives kind of opens up when we have kids. And so you spent your early years as a mom staying home with your kiddos, and then later decided to go back to work. How did getting clear on your purpose influence all of those different decisions?
Yeah, it was such a significant time to make the decision to stay home and raise my kids, because for those 10 years that I didn't work were really the most significant time in growing my relationship with God. If I had continued working at the speed that I had been, I don't think that I would have made that time to really develop and get to know God, which then in turn really changed my path in the sense that my focus was so very different coming back into the workplace 10 years later. Something I always wanted to do, something I always expected to do, that when my kids got a little older, I would go back to work. But my focus and my purpose was very different because of cultivating my relationship with God.
You, sister, have an insane schedule. Up at 5, working out, taking kids to school or heading to work, traveling, being on location, memorizing scripts, and also writing books in your spare time. How in the world do you maintain your energy? And do you have any practical tips for all of us who want to be able to do it but feel like we are failing in a million different ways?
Well, just remember, when you feel like you're failing in a million different ways, we're all there right with you. You're not the only one. We all feel like it, and none of us can do it all, not at the same time at least. And I remind myself of that all the time. There are seasons in life, so you can be ambitious and have goals, and you can do it all, but yeah, not at the same time. So let's see, how do I do it? Practical advice. I know that first and foremost, because I do have quite a rigorous schedule of traveling and the amount of hours in my day, being healthy and taking care of my body is very important for me. And I talk a lot about health and fitness if you follow me on social media or in my books. And that really is a must, because if I'm not fueling myself with good foods, if I'm not getting some sort of exercise in, and I'm not talking about being like this, crazy, exercising super rigorously every single day, not like that, but something as basic as getting a walk each day or stretching. If I don't do those things to care for my body, I certainly can't maintain my lifestyle. And the other huge part of maintaining that as well is my spiritual life, because I know I can't do it all without God either. And so I think those are the 3 most important foundational things for me to kind of juggle my busy schedule. But, over the years, like I said, I've learned that things are seasonal and not to try to do it all at one time. And I've also learned to say no and not feel bad about it and not feel guilty, that there's a time and a place. And sometimes we have to focus on certain things in our lives. And it's okay if maybe some relationships or friendships have to take a back seat. If they're a true friend, they'll understand the busy time in your life at that moment. And it can pick back up when the timing is different. And it's okay to not feel like you have to juggle everything, even if it's with your kids in school and being that PTA mom or crafty mom or baking it's okay. I remind myself all the time, just give yourself grace and do what you can. But if it's at the point where it's so overwhelming and stressful, then you probably need to take something off your plate and don't feel bad about it.
That is so good and so accurate. One thing that I loved about reading your new book is learning that you are not only ballsy but also tender. I
love that.
You have a friend named Ron who's a director, and you've worked with him before. He's someone that you love and appreciate, but who's super different from you, which in my opinion makes for great friendship.
Yep.
But at one point when you were on The View, you would post clips from the show on social media, and it seemed like he at similar times was posting opposing opinions that felt somewhat pointed. And so there was a moment where you had a choice, whether to wonder if it was intentional, to get your feelings hurt, or to ask him, which is what you did. You called him up, and I was so impressed by that. And the way you write about that conversation is so beautiful and redemptive. Will you just share a little bit about that call and kind of how it's shaped your life and your friendship?
Oh, thank you. That makes me feel good. You're one of the first people I'm talking about my new book. So I haven't shared any of these stories yet in any kind of interview. So that's exciting for me to know that was that story stuck out to you. It certainly did for me. It came to the point, and it's so hard to read people. It's such can be very awkward and yet a sensitive place to read into too much when it comes to social media and being online, because we all know how heated things can get on Facebook, or someone's friend says something and you take it personally and it just didn't have anything to do with you in the first place. And so it can be a tricky area to navigate. But because this was a friend of mine and someone who I really adored, and yet it felt it did feel pointed, it was something that I couldn't get off my heart for several days, and I kept praying about it for several days. That's how much it bothered me. And I know that if I'm thinking about something several days in a row that much, like it doesn't leave my heart, then it's something I need to confront. I don't like sweeping things under the rug. I don't like blowing things off. It's not who I am, and I want to have closure. I want to feel at peace with my relationship. So because it kept bothering me, I picked up the phone, and let me tell you, my heart was beating out of my chest. It was not an easy thing to do, but his friendship meant so much to me that I had to just say, hey, I might be reading into this, but maybe I'm not. And is there anything that we could talk about? Because I'm feeling really uneasy, and I don't want any kind of underlying friction within our friendship happening, and even a work relationship that I'm unaware of. And I want to know that if I even personally did anything to offend you, I'd like to know that so that I can either apologize for it or defend the reason why I did it. And we ended up having this incredible conversation, and he was so appreciative, and just like you said at the beginning, was kind of surprised at how ballsy I was for just calling him up and asking him point blank these questions, that it even solidified our friendship even more. And just knowing how different we are. And yet I felt very comfortable and free that I share my faith very openly with people, whether they're believers or not. And in this case, he's not a believer. But I explained to him my point of view and why I have those thoughts, and he appreciated it. And even though he didn't agree with any of them, but that's what so much of my book is, like the point that I'm trying to make within the book is that you can still love people and be kind to people, even if you don't agree with them. And it doesn't mean you have to back down. It doesn't mean that you can't have a strong opinion about something. It doesn't mean you don't have to hide and not share those opinions with someone you know you aren't going to agree with. You can still do all those things, but you can still be kind and respectful and classy in the process.
Beautiful. Love it so, so much. Okay, so we asked all of our MOPS friends what they wanted to ask you, and there were all sorts of great questions, but there were a couple that really made me laugh, so I'm going to ask you those ones. Okay. The first one is, what parenting lesson from Full House or Fuller House do you use in real life?
That's a good one. Okay, we're just going to go with the old makeup lesson from Aunt Becky. Less is more, the natural look. That's what boys and people like more on girls, is just to enhance the beauty that you already have and not cake on your makeup.
Love it. That is like a timeless piece of advice, I feel like. Okay, people were also extremely curious about what it's like to kiss other men that are not your husband.
I get that question a lot on social media. Here's the thing. This is probably a longer answer than you'll want. But in my very first kiss was on TV. So I've been acting since I was 5 years old. And at 13 years old, I had my first kiss with millions of people watching, even my parents on the sideline because they were at the taping of the show. And it's something that within my job, I've literally been doing since I was 13 years old. So yes, obviously that can change when you're an adult and then you're married. And my husband and I have had those conversations very early on in our marriage, and we put up boundaries as to what I am willing and will and won't do as an actress as far as it comes to any kind of sexual content and kissing. And basically, if you've seen my Hallmark movies, I mean, that's the extent of what I do is a simple kiss. So sometimes it can be really awkward because I've been placed with my leading man in a movie, and on the first day we've just met and it's like, oh, we have a kissing scene. And it's totally weird. And yet, and then there's other days where I'm very comfortable in the sense of like Fuller House and Full House. I've known Scott Weinger for 30 years. He played my boyfriend on TV growing up, and now I'm still dating him on the show. And but it's a very different experience for me than it probably would be for someone that's never been an actor, because it's just a part of my job. And so there's such a separation in my brain as to what I'm looking at a script and what my character is doing, as opposed to Candace actually having feelings.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so this year in my life, I have dedicated to the pursuit of having more fun. How do you create fun in your life?
I like having fun too. I think it's the people I choose to be around, because that might sound simple because it doesn't necessarily matter. The fun isn't always the activity or the place for me. At least it's the people that I choose to be with. And I think I find really fun friends that bring out the best in me, and hopefully that I bring out the best in them, and that just enjoy life. And then it's like, okay, no matter what we're doing, whether something fun like going on a hike or a bike ride, like that's fun for me, or going shopping, or just hanging out at home, having a glass of wine, like that's fun too.
Totally.
So I think it's the company that I choose to be with makes things fun.
It's so accurate. Do you ever feel like, because you have so many things going on, that it's hard to be present? Are you like writing the book in the back of your mind while you're memorizing a script, or like, are you multitasking all the time, or do you feel like you're really good at being present and not trying to do everything all at once?
A combination, both of those things. I don't know that my brain really ever shuts off, and sometimes I am thinking about a lot of things and trying. But the actual task of multitasking, I don't feel like I'm very good at. So, for instance, when I'm writing my book, I have to be alone. I have to be in a quiet space. I can't be distracted because I am so fully present. And I can't do it if there's anything around me, let alone my brain thinking of other things. Like, that just doesn't happen. And same with when I'm with my kids. Like, of course I can sometimes think of the to-do list, but for the most part, because I know my time is more limited with my kids because they're teenagers, they have their own lives. I have a life of traveling and all that. I'm pretty good at being present where I'm at. But when I go to bed at night, let me tell you, hard to shut my brain off. It's really hard.
So I feel like that's true for every woman around the world.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Okay, I have one last question for you. When it comes to juggling motherhood and work and marriage and all of those things, what would you say is critical to making it all work?
What's critical for me is my relationship with God. That is the core. It's my everything that makes all the pieces come together and holds them together when they come apart. I couldn't do it without my relationship with God.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now go out and have more fun, and don't come back until you do.